This is a picture of Mark Lipton when he served as a Tennessee deputy sheriff. For years, I have been trying to get that time in his life to matter to not only Tennessee residents, but also all civic-minded Americans who encountered my related advocacy. In fact, for some of you, this episode won't be the first time you've heard Mark's story. His story of hardship when he should have long been hailed as a hero. But whether you're learning of Mark's difficulty for the first or 100th time, what we all should especially remember is that in substantial part, we're being made privy to his family's story. It's Mark, his wife, their 3 children, 6 children if you consider their blended family, and it's March of the year 2020. They are the face of vulnerability.
Go ahead.
All right, so basically my story begins with a traffic stop I made some years ago. I was working in a particular area in my county close to my home. I observed a individual driving not over, just a little bit over the double lines, but his vehicle was completely on the wrong side of the road. I gave chase, and I made a traffic stop on an individual, a prominent local person here in our county. And when I first came in contact with the gentleman, I don't want to use the language that he said, but it was clear that he had been drinking. As I approached him and made first contact, I could see there were several open containers, and he had been in fact consuming one during the chase. He had an open container in the car. When I made contact with him and told him that I'd like to have a field sobriety test done on him, he basically stated, he said that I'm so intoxicated, just arrest me. Now, my boss, who was home at this time, the sheriff usually is in the office in the mornings, and then in the evenings he goes home, but he listens to his radio. He heard who I had in custody, and he got on the radio and told my acting supervisor that evening to give him a call. Moments later, as I was en route from the scene of the traffic stop to the medical center to get a blood alcohol kit on the guy since he couldn't perform the sobriety test, I was ordered to stop my car to meet with my supervisor, and he had advised me that the sheriff, who had just told him to call him at his home, told him that if we didn't let this individual go, we were both going to lose our jobs. I didn't agree with it. I couldn't do anything about it other than, potentially be faced with job loss. And my supervisor summoned this individual's family to come and retrieve this person from the back of my car. And he was taken from my custody, released to his family, and I was told to ignore any phone calls I may get that evening, because there was clearly 5, 6 other officers that worked that heard that I had pulled somebody over. I had somebody in custody, and I never made it to the medical center to get this blood alcohol test done on this individual. And I was going back in service, back on patrol, and my phone, in fact, did start to ring. I was ordered not to answer it. The following day, I was told, when I reported for duty, I was told by the sheriff, he said, "Lipton, I owe you one," and sent me out of his office, took up the paperwork that I had on the traffic stop, and and that was it.
Well, Mr. Lipton, we've been working on this case together for quite some time. Now, if I recall properly, there was property damage as well that you observed. Is that true? That the driver was
Yes.
hitting vehicles. Tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, when the individual turned from Wares Valley Road, he turned right onto a road called Happy Hollow. He turned so wide that he hit the street sign on the opposite side of the street, which would have been turning into oncoming traffic if there was somebody. He took down an entire street sign before his vehicle came to a rest against a makeshift curb over there. I believe it was a telephone pole that was on the side of the road there that was, acting as a curb.
First of all, this interview, I have to acknowledge, is an intrusion on a painful chapter of your life, Mrs. Charles. And I thank you so much for allowing us to share this time with you, because it's so important, I think, to remind our viewers about the seriousness and potential devastation of DUIs, driving under the influence of intoxicants, alcohol, drugs. And of course, you lost your husband to a drunk driver, is my understanding. When did that happen?
That happened October 4th, 2015.
Okay, so not quite 5 years ago. Now, I'm going to ask you to tell us very briefly what happened, because, this again, it's an invasion of your privacy, and you have to relive a difficult time of your life. But before we even get into that, let me ask you this: is it your impression that most people don't take DUIs, or driving while intoxicated, or driving under the influence of alcohol? Is it your experience that people don't take that seriously unless someone gets injured, maybe even killed as a result?
Yes, it's my impression that drinking is not serious to some people because it's a way of them celebrating. They
Okay.
have a right to celebrate and enjoy life, especially during certain occasions. Mardi Gras is one of the times that in Louisiana we celebrate and they're allowed to drink. Now, whether or not they're going to follow the law and
Hmm.
drive, I'm not sure, but
Hmm.
it's their right to celebrate. My husband's family does it. They are a family of enjoyment, and they love to drink.
Hmm. Hmm. Now, is that a topic that you started to think about after you lost your husband, or before?
My husband and I were non-drinkers,
Okay.
so we were designated drivers for those who drank. So that's something that's all my life
Hmm.
I've been aware of the drinking and driving. And I was always the designated driver for my family and for friends.
Hmm. And the reason why I asked it, it's not as if I'm taking some type of formal psychological survey, but as an advocate, and as a person who has advocated on behalf of law enforcement officers who had negative repercussions for trying to enforce a DUI ticket against an influential community resident. um, it just amazed me that there were no deaths involved, no physical injuries except the property involved in the case that I've been focusing on, former Deputy Sheriff Mark Lipton. But it just amazed me that there was not more outrage that his attempt to do his job by bringing in someone who was clearly driving under influence of some type of intoxicant, had crashed into parked cars, and I was causing quite a bit of havoc, as former Deputy Sheriff Lipton is going to share with our audience at a different point in this video episode. It just amazed me that people didn't rise their feet and see him as a hero, that he was doing his job. I thought perhaps maybe if someone had been physically injured, it would be different. Do you think that would have been the deciding factor, that it takes someone getting physically injured for people to remember just how dangerous this is?
I think that it would have,
Hmm.
but now with my crash and my experience, hats off to that officer for doing what was right. But in an influential community, not only the community, but an influential DA office,
Okay.
a lot of people um, in the background, they're not aware of the cover-ups that goes on. Now
Okay.
you're saying prior to someone getting killed or injured. Even when my husband was killed and I was injured, the police officers did their job. They were spectacular, and hats off to them for
Hmm.
that.
Hmm.
But it's the DA office, it's the judge, and it's the defense attorney that gets together and they sort of overturn what the police officer does. In my case, the police officer was there on the scene. He had everything on the video cam. It wasn't until 2 years later that I knew there was an actual video cam that caught the crash on film. I found that out through the law enforcement. The DA office did not share that with me until I found out on my own in 2017. So with this officer, there are three kinds of people that I've learned in this life.
Hmm.
Those are the ones who make things happen. They're concerned. They're not going to sit on the sideline. Then there are those who watch what happened. They're spectators. They're
Yeah.
not going to say anything. And then there are those who wonder what happened. They're still not going to be actively involved. They just want to receive information, not to give any. And I found through other victims that I've spoken with, they do not have the trust factor needed
Hmm.
with the law, the way the justice system operates, okay?
Hmm.
They're thinking, and especially people of color, and I know that has nothing to do with it, but I'm learning that especially people of color, they are not as trusting for the officers or the justice system to do their job,
Okay.
because we've had so many incidents that have happened in the past that makes them think that they're not going to say anything even if there is a cover-up. They experience your sadness, and that's about as far as they go with it. So I believe in the what and why. Like, what can I do to make things better, and why hasn't anything been done before this happened?
So basically, not agreeing with what had transpired, a short time later, I had left the Sevier County Sheriff's Department, and I became an employee of the Hamlin County Sheriff's Department. In transition, I had contacted the TBI about it because I didn't agree with what had been done. I spoke with the TBI. They conducted a brief investigation, and they said that my allegations were unfounded.
Okay, now
What we now
1 minute with regard to this TBI for our audience. What is that that acronym? What is that? The Tennessee Bureau of Investigation?
Yes, the TBI is, I guess, you like your local FBI office. They investigate like officer misconduct and so forth. And I reached out to them. I initially told them, I said, because I was familiar with the agent that had worked in my county, I called and spoke with the guy in charge at the time, Dwayne Johnson. I said, look, I said, don't send me anybody that's, familiar with the sheriff's department. I'd like to speak with somebody and tell you what's transpired. And lo and behold, they sent me somebody that is a regular around the Sevier County Courthouse and very familiar with the sheriff's department, which I didn't agree with. Um, Allegedly, they conducted an investigation into what I had told them had happened, and several weeks later, they said my traffic stop was unfounded. They because what we now know that a lot of the information that was in the computer was taken out, at the direction of the sheriff. Ironically, what's transpired since then in regards to the district attorney having a part in this and everything. Here, about 2 years ago, maybe a little over 2 years ago, my one of my bosses at the sheriff's department, and I don't know if I should mention his name or not, one of my bosses at the sheriff's department, after the investigation was unfounded, and I looked rather foolish, almost like the boy who cried wolf and wasn't telling the truth, he had a falling out with the Sevier County Sheriff, my boss, his boss at the time, and he met with the FBI for several hours at his home, and he told them, look, he said, I was there. He said, the sheriff directed us to cover this thing up or we'd all lose our jobs. He said, Mark Lipton was telling you the truth, or telling the truth when this happened. The TBI sided with the sheriff. Another attorney, a local prominent attorney in my county, Brian Delius, contacted my attorney, my trial attorney, David Wigler, during the period where I was going through the trial for the alleged aggravated assault, and a woman had came forward and with information, and she said, look, I know about what happened that night. He in fact did tell the truth. And so two people came forward after the fact and said that, hey, this really happened. I contacted here a while back, maybe before the beginning of summer, I contacted the TBI because they now have a new director. And I said, look, I want to know something. I said, are you aware, did anybody ever communicate with you that the FBI was informed that I was in fact telling the truth when you closed this investigation and ruled it as being unfounded? They weren't aware of the FBI knowing and meeting with witnesses. So the gentleman that I spoke with, I think his name, second in charge, Josh Melton, I think was his name, he contacted the FBI directly, and they told him, yes, that there was communication with a witness and so forth. And he said, Mark, he said, all we can do is ask Jimmy Dunn, same district attorney who wrote me off as being a menace, when the initial investigation came back that it was unfounded, and the one we filed a complaint against. He said, Mark, he said, I'm going to have an agent call you. He said, I'm going to write up a complaint. He said, and I said, what are you going to do with it? He said, it has to go to Jimmy Dunn's office. I said, well, you're wasting your time. I said, Jimmy Dunn wrote me off years ago. I said, because I had to file a complaint against him for what he did to me, in the legal sense. And I said, he doesn't believe a word I said because he's unaware of the fact that this investigation was covered up. So less than a year ago, maybe a year, the TBI formulated a new report to Jimmy Dunn asking for permission to investigate, and he has done nothing with it. Mm.
Well, first of all, I want to commend that officer because he was doing his job. He was hired to protect the community, and most people don't realize, I wish that his community would rally around him, because every day that we're on the road with thousands of intoxicated drivers. Mad statistics stated that 2 in 3 people will be impacted in their lifetime by a drunk driver. 1 in every 58 minutes is dying on the road, and DWI is the #1 cause of death on the roads. I would tell the community to rally around this officer for doing his job and for protecting his community, because there is cover-up in the justice system. And if we don't speak out against it, imagine how many families have to go through the anxiety, the depression, the pain of losing a loved one when something could have been 100% preventable, and it is. And one other thing I would like to share, I would like to take my hats off to the officers who are doing their job, who are not being politically badgered just to do something that's not what they were sworn in to do, and that is to protect the people. And so if I can do anything to assist this officer in any way, please contact me.
And that you mentioned MAD, and you're referencing the Mothers Against Drunk Drivers organization?
It's a Mothers Against Drunk Driving organization, and a lot of times people are not aware that they have this resource available to them free of charge. As a matter of fact, there are a lot of victims I've met who is aware of a cover-up, but they're afraid to speak out. Mm-hmm. And I have given them several cards for the MAD representative, Mother Against Drunk Driving, because all we want to do is help these drivers, because apparently they have a problem. This wasn't the first time that this driver was driving intoxicated who killed my husband. And on hearsay, a lot of people knew him. He owned the bar. So in that particular area. But driving intoxicated, impaired, and not really knowing where you are was one of the things that this driver did. I failed to tell you that he was going 90 miles per hour in a community with a speed limit of 45 miles per hour. He could not brake because he was not aware that he had hit anything. So that's how impaired he was, without any knowledge of hitting anything, not remembering anything about that. So I just feel sorry for the people who live in that community where this sheriff did this police officer an injustice.
Okay, so basically, I explained about the traffic stop and what started the downhill spiral with my unblemished career. Shortly after, I can't remember how long after, I think maybe we figured it was a few months or something, I don't remember. But shortly after this went public, and mind you, I did polygraph on that and showed that I was telling the truth as well about the traffic stop, and I was the only one that even opted to take a polygraph. Once that information got out, I guess it ruffled the wrong feathers, and they felt like, they had to get even with me, and it was obvious in my treatment as I went through the judicial process. But what happened after the initial traffic stop was I was home. Long story short, I was home. I observed a teenager traveling down the road in front of my house on a off-road vehicle at a high rate of speed with a infant straddling the gas tank. And I went out there and tried to intervene and, told the boy, look, you can't be doing this. Take this home. Actually, his grandfather's property and mine, our driveways connect. So it was just a few feet where he had to just drive off the road and take it home. He listened. The boy went. As I started to walk back down my driveway, there was another four-wheeler that came out of the holler, and it was the grandfather. He was irate. He attacked me. My wife, who was my fiance at the time, she witnessed the attack. She even stated that they just hit me, so I was actually even struck first. She called 911 at my direction, and you could hear this whole thing play out live in the background. She was screaming for help because I was being attacked by several people. When police arrived on the scene, after a brief investigation, they determined that they were not making any arrests that day. In the state of Tennessee, as you know, we've talked about the warrant issue. If police opt to not charge anybody when a crime is investigated, especially one of a felonious nature, if they opt not to, then no warrant shall issue. Ironically, that evening, we were turned away. The judicial magistrate told us, come back, my wife and I, the following day with the police report, and you can see what he can do. We came back the following day at his discretion, and we were told that we weren't going to be given a warrant. After being directed to come and get one, we were told that we weren't going to be given a warrant, that I was under criminal investigation. Just out of the blue. This came from nowhere. I was now under criminal investigation. And shortly after I was advised that we were not going to be able to get a warrant, I think it was 8 hours after we were turned away, my wife and from getting a warrant. They allowed my accuser, who was a private affiant at the time. Now I had a law enforcement background. I should have been able to get the warrant, but this individual was just a private affiant. He owns a construction business. He somehow was able to get a warrant issued to him himself for a felony arrest, which violates state statute, and I was taken to jail.
Tell us. Let me try to talk our audience a bit more through the difference between a private citizen and a private affiant. That's a person that's affirming under oath the truth, claiming to affirm under oath the truth of what they're saying. Tell us a bit more about that to help us understand that process and how unusual that is for a private citizen to be able to get for an arrest warrant to issue, particularly against a law enforcement officer, based on just a statement of a private citizen.
Well, Tennessee Code Annotated, TCA 40-6-205, touches base on, and you can look this, you can Google that. It touches base on how warrants and summonses are handled in the state of Tennessee. Now, a private affiant is anybody that's not working in the law enforcement field per se. A private person shall not be issued a felony arrest warrant, and the statute specifically says that. I was a law enforcement officer acting in the capacity of a concern. I was off duty, but I felt obligated to act out of the safety and fear that little child would be hurt. In the care of this teenager traveling at a high rate of speed on a motorized vehicle. So basically, what it is that when you report a felony in the state of Tennessee, police come out and they investigate it. If police find that there is no what they call probable cause to make an arrest, then there's not enough probable cause for a warrant to be issued. Okay. Mm-hmm. Now, mind you, also the day that they decided that they were not going to arrest me, they seized, and it's even in the police report, and this is a thing that my attorney, who was handling the new appeal, is getting ready to argue. They seized my off-duty weapon when they, in fact, made no arrest that day. My arrest came 24 hours later when this private person, my accuser, was somehow issued a defective warrant. Okay. And that's when I went to jail. Okay. What were the charges made against you, the criminal charges? I was charged with aggravated assault. Okay. And were there ever at any point an accusation that your weapon was involved? But of course, with an aggravated assault, there must be some type of weapon. So tell us what you were accused of doing. Yeah, it was, excuse me, it was aggravated assault by display of weapon, despite he alleged under oath, and that's another issue we're arguing with appeal. He alleged he was pistol whipped, and that's why we're arguing there should have been DNA testing of the gun, because all along I affirmed it never happened. I also actually took a second polygraph on this whole incident. It showed that I was telling the truth, given by another FBI agent, former FBI agent here locally. So I passed 2 polygraphs showing I was telling the truth. But backing up to the incident, when I went out there to converse with the grandfather and tell him, basically why I sent his grandson home, he attacked me. He came at me with the 4-wheeler. He punched me in the face. He summoned several of his family members. Ultimately, when police arrived on scene, I was on the ground on my back. The 4-wheeler, I guess when they had heard that my wife had summoned the police, they were trying to get this 4-wheeler out of the road. So in doing so, I was on the ground because I was choked out and taken to the ground. They pushed the 4-wheeler over my legs. It was on top of me when police arrived on scene. When the police arrived on scene, there was one individual that I was familiar with that I had worked with. And it was a new rookie. He'd only had 6 weeks experience total. He never worked anywhere else. When they arrived on scene, I told him, I said to the rookie, I said, look, I said, I'm an officer. I've got a gun. I've got a badge. I've got ID. I said, I need to get it out of my pocket. this four-wheeler is resting on my legs. I said, I need to hand you what I can get out of this pocket because it's hurting me. So I handed him the weapon. And when the weapon came out and there was a witness that testified to this, there was no mention of a gun. But when they saw the weapon being given to the officer from myself to him, that's when it became a topic of the conversation.
Okay.
Ironically, both officers, the detective who advised the rookie to seize the weapon, he was fired from the sheriff's department for arresting two of the wrong individuals during a robbery. And then the rookie, who had only had 6 weeks experience total, he had left the Sevier County Sheriff's Department shortly thereafter, and for quite some time he wasn't working in law enforcement anymore. He may be now, I'm not certain, but he was gone from the department shortly after my arrest.
Okay. Now, your neighbor, the grandfather,
Yes.
who you had this altercation with, and we left off with him securing a warrant for your arrest, even though there was not probable cause determined at the scene. And you have educated us on the fact that this arrest warrant should have never been issued. Who is this guy? How does this happen? How does he have this type of influence?
The gentleman, his name is Henry Sutton. He is my neighbor. At the time this alleged incident happened, his daughter was married into the sheriff's family through a first cousin. She's no longer married to him, but she was married. I have said all along that I felt like I was being retaliated against. There was a television interview, and I even said it then. I feel like I was being retaliated against. I felt with that direct connection, they had the opportunity to get me, and I think they were in such a hurry to do so that they did. That this warrant, for example, which should have never have been issued, was issued without them thinking about the legal process, just to cause harm to me and cause career loss. To give you an idea of what his background is like, he some years ago was married to a woman. She had to take out an order of protection against him. He pulled a gun on her in their home in front of their children, so she had to get an order of protection against him. He's married to a woman now who both she and her daughter were convicted some years back. Actually, during my alleged incident, they were two of my attackers. They were both on probation for dealing hydrocodones to an undercover officer in my county. Along with, shortly thereafter, the trial, the grandson who I stopped on the four-wheeler, who also testified against me, he was, I think it was, he brought marijuana or something to the high school, and he was also arrested for that. So 3 of the family members had drug charges that testified against me, and the grandfather had a history of violent behavior. He put a gun to his ex-wife's head.
So, did you have a jury trial?
I did. I had a jury trial.
And
Yes.
you testified. You presented your account of what happened, and
Yes.
you indicate that all these people testified, and you were convicted. In fact, convicted. How does that happen?
Again, and I've said this all along, and it's been mentioned in much of the trial transcripts throughout the process. I have felt like I have been retaliated against through the whole process. Give an example. My first wife of 20 some odd years and myself, we went through a divorce, and I had a difficult time in the judiciary with the divorce process. And unsolicited, my attorney at the time, Felicia, her name is Felicia White, she had said as we were walking out of the parking lot after we were basically handed our heads, she said, Mark, she said, I got to tell you, she said, something's wrong here, and I feel that it has to do with your traffic stop. She said, I can't believe, she said, nor do I have the words, on how we were treated. She said, I can't believe what I witnessed in there. And she said, I am so sorry. She said, I don't have the words. She said, I'm going to have to go back and speak to my mother. Her mom's also an attorney. So even during my divorce process, unsolicited, an attorney, there was a person right there that saw how they treat me, said she felt like it had something to do with the traffic stop. Now, when my trial transpired, my attorney at the time, his name was David Wigler, when we lost, he went out and publicly apologized to my family. He told them, look, folks, he said, there's something wrong here. It's obvious they're out to get Mark. He said, I'm sorry. He said, I don't know what to say. He said, I regret that we lost. He said, we should have won. He said, I've never seen anything like this before. So it was obvious to two separate attorneys that they felt that I had a difficult time because of speaking out.
Let me confirm for our viewers. Had you ever been disciplined as a law enforcement officer with regard to anything at the time that you were criminally prosecuted for aggravated assault against this neighbor?
No, I think you remember the individual with the police foundation,
Yes.
Joseph Acapenti, his foundation, National Police Defense Foundation. They too conducted an investigation into the facts, and they even stated in their reward flyer that a veteran officer with an unblemished 10-year record is how they referred to me. I did my best every day, as best as I could to my ability. I've never been suspended or any of that, no.
Now, get us up to date with regard to, so you were convicted. Tell us what happened in trying to get that conviction overturned or get a new trial.
Nothing. I mean, everything that's been tried thus far has been unsuccessful. We can't get any sort of relief, whether it's through, the legal process where they have made where there's been instances of gross misconduct on their parts by filing complaints. The Bar Association, the Board of Professional Responsibility, hasn't done anything with our complaints. I haven't had any relief in the judiciary either, and I'm hopeful now that I have a new attorney who seems to appreciate everything I'm telling her and asking her to do. I'm hoping we have success in the appeal that we're requesting oral arguments for, which should be coming up in the next few weeks.
Tell us, if you would, Mr. Lipton, how has this affected you personally? How has this affected your family? And a lot of times people understate those things. I want you to be as candid as possible with our audience, because they need to understand the toll that has been imposed on you and your family for, as you indicate, trying to do your job.
It's hard. My support base is rather large. I mean, in fact, that's how you and I, became acquaintances. Reached out to you, and you've bent over backward to help as well. My family, my wife especially, who witnessed it. One of my children also saw the incident. They know I was telling the truth. It's very hard mentally to deal with the stress of being in trouble for something you didn't do. But I just keep plugging away. I've had many people ask me, well, how come you don't have a drinking problem or do drugs? Well, I didn't believe in those things even when I was a police officer, so I'm not going to start that now. I just have a strong, faith base and, good family support, and I'm hoping eventually somebody steps in and helps me right this wrong, because, in today's times where people don't like the police, and a lot of police officers have been killed in the line of duty because of that fact, I did what you're supposed to do. I spoke out, and I was punished for it. So I understand the frustration that people, feel when they say, well, where are the good cops? How come they never do anything? Well, I can tell you, I was a good cop. I did something, but I was punished for it.
And you have a wife at the time, and you all have a family, 4 children, right?
Well, it's a blended family. We have six together.
Six together, and of course,
Blended, yes.
they've all grown. And some have become adults throughout the course of this. I
Two are
want to.
married. Two are married now. Yeah,
Yes, that's
I have my
amazing.
youngest is 8 years old.
That's amazing.
It's hard, Zena. It's hard. Financially, it was a bit of a strain. I've had to use public defenders because I can't afford representation.
Hmm.
They want an astronomical amount of money to represent you for something of this nature. But we're getting by.
That's wonderful. Okay, well, any final words to our audience about this ordeal, or any other details you want to share with us?
Well, I guess in closing, I hope people realize that you know there are wrongful convictions in this country. Not everybody is crying wolf when they are in fact convicted of something. I've got polygraphs to prove I was telling the truth. Witnesses have come forward. My problems with the district attorney who won't even allow the investigation to be reopened. I feel that would expose a lot of what was done to me. Um, you know, I'm just hopeful that at some point this thing gets overturned, and I don't want people to dislike the police. There's good and bad in every occupation, but I want people to understand. I'm the poster child for retaliation. I did what you should do, and it came back to cause great harm to me and my family. But I can honestly say this: if faced with the same prospect again, I would go through it again. I have had people ask me if I regretted it. No, I don't regret ever telling the truth. I tell my kids that every day: tell the truth.
And
Tell us briefly, if you don't mind, what happened on that ill-fated, I believe it was evening or night that your husband, tell us his full name and briefly what happened to the two of you all.
my husband's name is Vance Joseph Charles,
Okay.
and we were at my nephew's home. He had just purchased a new home, and the New Orleans Saints was playing, and we are fans of the Saints. And we left before they had the overtime, and we felt that we were 5 minutes away from our home, that we would get there and watch the overtime. When we left, my husband made a wrong turn. We were in a different community, and when we turned around and we were just about to start moving forward, there was an explosion. And what I thought was an explosion, I was still conscious enough to say, that's an explosion. What happened? It shook our truck. But what happened was the truck was going airborne. I had no idea. We reached to the top of the tallest tree on that street, and we were flipping over and over. I still had no idea what had taken place until we landed. And of course, my husband was unconscious.
Yes.
And he was taken to the hospital by ambulance, and I was airlifted. And at that particular time, I had no idea that he was dead.
Mm.
And it was just disheartening. But we also, like I stated earlier, had no idea there was a police officer on the scene, because that was the person who opened the door of the truck to get me out, was a police officer. So seconds after we landed, a police officer was on the scene.
Yes. And you were seriously injured yourself. Can you tell us a bit about your physical injuries?
Well, I was 6 months from a surgery, a neck surgery. I was recouping from that, and it takes 24 months to do that. I had a concussion. I had a thoracic spine injury. I had a contusion next to my lung that was resected, because I am a lung cancer patient.
Okay.
And I had a contusion. I was bruised, swollen, face swollen. There were bruises all over my body. Mm-hmm. And internal injury.
Okay.
So
you're still recovering, is that right?
Yes, still recovering from that. Still having back issues, neck issues. Still having anxiety attacks. from that.
Hmm.
No, it's ongoing,
I'm
the injuries
sure.
that I sustained.
I'm sure. Unfortunately, we've got a good sense of what your answer to this question is probably going to be, but were you satisfied? Well, first, let me confirm and not be so presumptuous. The
Mhm.
driver that struck your husband and you and your vehicle, was he criminally prosecuted?
He was, but not to the length of what I thought he should have been, and according to the statute.
Tell me what you
This was
mean.
an, this was an unorthodox case.
How is that?
And, well, first of all, they had all the evidence there that I did not know of until 2 years later.
Okay.
Speaking with the DA's office, I asked him personally, I was related, or did he know the person that was going to be prosecuted? And he said no, because there were some areas of concern by my husband's family and by friends who knew this man in that community.
The driver.
The driver,
Mm-hmm.
yes. And we went through a long process with a continuance. And it was continuance after continuance. But at the time that we were having the court dates, I was still mending from traumatic brain injury, which was me having a short-term memory and dealing with that. So I wasn't cognizant to understand that something was not right until 2 years later, when I find us going into another continuance, January 2017. And that's when I started advocating for myself with the DA's office. He was given a sentence of 18 years, suspended 11, but the bill of information that was sent to the Department of Correction had a .08 alcohol BAC when he was actually a .20.
Oh my goodness.
And so what happened, I investigated
Actually a 2.0, not
no, a .20.
Okay.
Because it was a .08, and then it goes up to
Okay. Yes, I see.
0.2. Yes, because the statute, they have three different categories. He fell in the category of a 1.5 or greater.
Okay.
And the first category was a 0.08, and that would have allowed him a lesser sentencing, lesser time. But it was a .20, and plus there was a death. So the DA refused to change what he had placed on the bill of information. So I went through a period of about a year almost, just trying to get this taken care of before he would be released on a .08. I do have documentation from the DOC where I call their office. I do have documentation where I call the Attorney General's office. I was in touch with a victim advocator over there. I do have documentation where, in actuality, the DA's .08 gave him parole date February 2019. Well, with me pursuing this, the DOC supervisor told me if I can present anything that had a .20 on it from the DA's office with their letterhead, he would change that parole date.
Okay.
Which I did, and I do have documentation for that. And the parole date would have actually been May 2022.
Oh.
Instead, he let me know that it was nothing that he could do about it because of the good time behavior. So he was out in less than 2 years.
Until next time, be safe, do good, and ponder how much one depends on the other.